Hi, and thanks for joining me for the first in a series of question and answer videos I'm putting together in response to a lot of inquiries I get concerning my book and advanced rapport building techniques. I just thought this would be a good informal way to kind of sit down with you all and share what I'm very passionate about, and a lot of people are, because really interpersonal communications is at the heart of all that we do as human beings. So to me, there's nothing more important, whether it's dealing and communicating with our children, our wives, our spouses, friends, colleagues, workers, you name it, across the spectrum. These techniques are effective with everyone. And I was very fortunate earlier in my career, both as a Marine officer and then later in the FBI and then head of the behavioral analysis program, that I learned that the interpersonal art form that I was very fortunate to learn from some real masters and some good mentors in my life can really be broken down into a paint by number. So it's my joy has been taking that art form and making it a paint by number for everyone. So you can do these things a lot more proactively and without having to make mistakes along the way or really keeping the focus on yourself, which is at the root of bad communication. So before I get to the first technique, I'm gonna explain in a little more detail. I want to give you an overview of how I do what I do, and it's really very simple. One thing I do like to promise is you've probably done this before in your life, so it's just recognizing it proactively. I call it it's like my new car effect. If you can think back to the day that you bought your new car or a car, and you started recognizing that car everywhere. It's as if it magically appeared and 300 people in your town bought that same car. Well, that's because you're sensitized to it, and once you're sensitized to something, you can use it and recognize it more proactively. So that's what I like to do with these techniques. I talk about some science behind them and why they're effective, and so each time that you see the opportunity, you can do it proactively because you recognize it. So at the heart of what makes people feel good is a chemical in the brain called dopamine. Dopamine is released, I call it my sex, drugs, rock and roll, and validation drug. Because what happens is when you're feeling very good or enjoying something, this dopamine is released in your brain. Now, when a human being is being validated, and that's the technique we're going to talk about today, is technique 6, which is validation, dopamine is released in the brain. And as a matter of fact, not too many months ago, a couple of researchers from Harvard University did a study. And in this study, they demonstrated that human beings, we in general talk about ourselves 40% of every day. And when we're talking about ourselves during that 40%, the dopamine is being released in our brain. So we make ourselves basically feel very good by self-validation and talking about ourselves. What they also found is that that same dopamine is released in the brain when someone else is talking about you and validating you. Validation is nothing more than accepting someone for who they are unconditionally and without judgment. And I'll give you an example. It's a lot deeper than saying, hey, that's a nice tie you're wearing today, or it's a nice dress. What we're talking about is understanding who someone is and being inquisitive about it, asking those open-ended how, when, why questions. Because when you do things like that, you're showing that you're interested in them and that you're accepting of what they're saying and you want to know even more about you. And people love talking about themselves. And what they're doing when they do this is they're challenging you. They're challenging whether you still accept them or not. Let me tell them a little bit more and see if they still accept me. And when you do, by asking how, when, and why questions after that, they'll give you even more because they're constantly challenging. Do you accept me as part of your social group, your social clique? And I'll talk more about that on a later video too, social proof. But it's that constantly validation of who you are as a human being. Now, the key to this is to not talk about yourself. No one cares. When you're doing validation, the second you start talking about yourself and not the other person, that dopamine will stop flowing and they'll just wander away and wonder what they were just doing. Because in all reality, when the dopamine's flowing and you are doing effective validation, they are becoming slightly addicted to you because it feels good. Imagine this. I'll give you an exact example of when this has happened in all your lives already. Have you ever had a conversation with someone, and either yourself or they said, I have to go in 5 minutes, and yet 20, 30, 40 minutes later, you're still there having that same conversation? I guarantee you it's because someone's dopamine was flowing very well, and the validation was exquisite. So I want to thank you all for stopping by. Please feel free to reach out anytime. You can reach me through my website, which is www.peopleformula.com, all one word. My Twitter tag is rdreeke, Rdreeke, and feel free to like me on Facebook. I put a whole potpourri out there so that you can choose which way you want to make contact with me. And please send in more questions that you have, and let me know what I can do to help. Thanks very much for stopping by, and I'll talk to you later.